record this for you guys, so that way you can always go back in and listen to this for if you're going to study. Okay. So first thing first, just a review of the chapter. I know this is a long review, but the chapter was kind of long. There's lots of parts going on in it, and it's a very important chapter. So I want to make sure you guys are seeing what the whole thing is about. So I'm going to read through this review, and then we'll get into the annotations that you guys were supposed to have done for homework, and we'll review those. So this chapter begins with the narrator Scout going over what happened at school with Cecil Jacobs, and then discussing this issue with Jem. The reader finds out that Cecil had called Atticus a Negro lover. I changed it from what it actually says in the textbook for appropriateness, but you can read that. Jem tells Scout to talk to Atticus about this, and maybe he will tell her what it meant, which happened on page 86. My references are coming from the larger books, just so you know. So the page numbers will be a little off if you're using the small book. When she asks him, he explains to her that he will be defending an African-American man named Tom Robinson. You need to remember that name. You cannot forget the person he is defending, okay? So make sure you have that name ingrained in your head. Tom Robinson, okay? He then goes over various reasons for why he's choosing to do this, even though he knows most likely he will not win the trial, which is stated in 86 to 87. And we'll get into those reasons. The story then cuts to Christmas Eve, where the whole Finch family gets together at Finch Landing. The reader is introduced to a few characters: Aunt Alexandra, Uncle Jack, and Cousin Francis. Uncle Jack gives both Jem and Scout air rifles for Christmas, so they begin to play with them, but Atticus has them stop since they do not know how to shoot, which happens on page 91. After Christmas dinner, Francis and Scout are talking, and Francis brings up Atticus defending Tom Robinson, which infuriates Scout. So she disregards Atticus's wishes of not fighting over this case, and she gets into a sort of argument with Francis on 94 to 95. Her Uncle Jack sees and hears about this and punishes Scout for her poor behavior. We see him actually like spank, toss her around a little bit, which during this time period, that was more than normal. So if that bugged you in any way, I apologize, but this is that was considered normal during that type of punishment. Later, while Uncle Jack is cleaning up her knuckles, she tells him what was said by Francis, and he apologized for not listening to her side of the story before getting upset, which happens on page 97 and 99. The conversation ends, and then Atticus and Uncle Jack are discussing how you should never lie to a child because they can see right through it. He continues to explain how he knows him taking the Tom Robinson case is going to be difficult for the kids, but that he hopes they come to him to ask questions and not listen to the people in Maycomb, which is the last couple pages of the chapter, page 99 to 101. The chapter ends with Scout overhearing this conversation and reflecting on how he must have wanted her to hear this, okay? So that is chapter 9 in a brief summarized version. Do you guys have any questions about the events that took place during this chapter, or any specifics about the characters, or something you just didn't quite understand so I can go over that with you now before you get quizzed on it? Any questions, or we feel good about?
I have one.
Yes. What is your question, Chase?
So where does Aunt Alexandra live? Yeah.
Where does she live? Ooh, I think they tell us that earlier on in the book. I think they might. I'll have to look into that. I want to say they told us that in chapter 1, but I don't remember off the top of my head. I will look into that for you while you guys are doing some of your annotations today in class, and hopefully I'll be able to get back to you at the end of class. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? Very good question, Chase.
I have one.
Yes, Tiana.
I'm kind of confused, like what the Yules, is that how you say it? That something has to do with the whole trial?
Okay, so we're going to learn more about this, but so in the big book, let's see, I'll turn to that page for you guys and read that chunk. So it's in the second to last page, page 100 in the big book. I don't know what page it is in the little book if you have that open. Let's see. And I believe it's on, wait, where is it on? Does anyone know where it is in the small book? No. Oh, page 117 in the small book, 117. Okay, so I want everyone to turn to those pages 100 and 117 because we're going to talk about this. This name will come up again. This is an important piece to the trial. So we have in here, it says, it couldn't be worse, Jack. The only thing we've got is a black man's word against the Yules. The evidence boils down to you did, I didn't. The jury couldn't possibly be expected to take Tom Robinson's word against the Yules. Are you acquainted with them? And he talks about them and briefly. So the Yules are going to be the people accusing, and I told you guys about this at the very beginning. Tom Robinson gets accused of rape. So these are going to be the people accusing him of rape. And we'll hear more about that once the trial actually starts. So it'll be more clear about what exactly their purpose is, but that's what you need to know about them right now. They're the people accusing him of something. Okay? Any other questions before we get into annotations? Are we good to go? All right, beautiful. So how this is going to work, I'm going to go over again briefly with you. You were supposed to annotate for these different things, okay? So you had 6 things that you guys had to annotate for. The first one being reasons that Atticus gives the children for taking the Tom Robinson case. I told you to number them and underline them in your text. You had to find one historical reference, or in other words, an allusion to a historical reference. You had to find a biblical reference, which is probably a little bit harder for some people, but another biblical allusion. You had to find a line or two about gender roles. It could have been a male gender role or a female one, either said by Scout or to Scout. You needed a line describing Aunt Alexandra, and then you needed to bracket the chunk that describe how Atticus actually parents his children, okay? So those were the things that you guys had to do for homework. They should have been done. We'll see if they are, because we're going to talk about these things. I am going to go through each one of these, and I pulled out quotes. You could have had other things there. That is totally fine, except for some, like the historical reference, biblical reference, and the reasons that Atticus gives, because there's really only one place for those things. But the other things could have varied. And we're going to talk about the significance of those things in this chapter, okay? So the first one was the reasons why Atticus gives the children for taking the Tom Robinson case. So you should have found, if you were using the big book on page 86, I'm not quite sure where it is in the little book. I didn't have a chance to go through and find that for you guys. But if you use the little book, I'm sure you found this quote. The main one is, if I didn't, I couldn't hold my head up in town. I couldn't represent this county in the legislature. I couldn't even tell you or Jem not to do something again. So those were the 3 reasons why he told Scout he took this case. So I want you to think about, and I want you to make note in your text, what do these reasons reveal about Atticus's motives or his values at the time, okay? So go ahead, and that could be like 1 or 2 words, a quick little like note, that's fine, but what does this tell us about his values or motives? If these are the things that he cares about. And I'll give you guys like 30 more seconds.
Wait, this time that he went on to say that like he felt like this was his one time as a lawyer that he was obligated to do this, right?
That's not really like the reasons why he had for taking it.
No, I was just saying like he felt, I think, didn't he like feel like some sort of like moral responsibility?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, it was like I guess not so much a moral responsibility, but if you're attaching it to the fact that he's a lawyer, it would be more like an ethical responsibility to take it.
Okay, yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's pull out a character trait for this. So what does it reveal about his values or morals or motives? What does he care about a lot? Who can help me out with that?
I said.
Okay, let's hear from Eden. I heard Eden first.
Okay. I said he like just wants to keep a good reputation in the town.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he does very much so care about the reputation that he holds and the respect that people give him, okay? He wants to be respected by people. And you can see that by how he portrays himself throughout this book so far. Is there anything else? I heard somebody else say,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it also had to do with like, not necessarily the example he's setting for his kids,
Mm-hmm.
but like he would feel like if he didn't take this up, that
Mm-hmm.
he wouldn't like be able to like tell them. I don't know. Like I think he talked about how he didn't feel like he could ever ask them to like mind him again or whatever. Like
Right.
feel
Like
like he would have that authority because he doesn't deserve that respect to himself. Like
right. Like if he's not doing what's ethically or morally correct, how could he ask?
then why
his
should he be able to tell his kids what to do? Yeah.
Exactly. So that's definitely something you'd want to get down, or at least know how to explain, understand. That's a good viewpoint to take, Tristan, and I think an important thing to have written down. Good job. Both you and Eden, very good job. So that's what you want to get down. He cares a lot about respect. He cares a lot about his reputation, and he also wants to be able to not just set a good example for his kids, but make them feel like he too is walking the walk. He's not just talking how he's supposed to, but he's doing what he says people should be doing as well. Okay. So that is that. I'm going to move on to the next one. After about 20 seconds, I'll give you a chance to kind of write it down. And then we'll move on to your second set of annotations. All right, moving on. So your second set of annotations was to find a historical reference. This happened pretty early in the chapter where Scout goes home to talk to Atticus about why the people at school would have been calling him what they called him. And then she compares this situation to the Missouri Compromise, and she's talking about one of her uncles or past uncles. And she goes, the Missouri Compromise was what licked us, but if I had to go through it again, now in 1864 when Stonewall Jackson came around by. And that happened on 87, so you can take up like the full context of that. But again, it's very close into the very beginning of the chapter. I want you guys, if you don't already know this, I want you to make note in your book about what is the Missouri Compromise, who was Stonewall Jackson, and what is the significance of referencing this historical event during this specific conversation, or making this kind of like comparison here. So I'm going to give you guys about, and you might have to look up these things if you're not like a history buff like me. I had to look them up. You can do that. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to kind of make note of those things for the people who have to look things up. Okay. But if you know, just make a note in your text, like above the word Missouri Compromise, write what it is briefly, right next to Stonewall Jackson, who that is. All right, if you guys have your stuff written down, give me the thumbs up emoji on your screen so that way I can see that you're good to go with this stuff. And if you need more time, I will give that time. All right, only a few of you guys are done, so I'll give you guys a little bit more time.
Miss Condos, I'm here.
Hello, is that Francis?
Yeah,
Oh, hello.
I had some difficulties with the internet thing.
Oh,
so,
okay. Oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's talk about these. So, what is the Missouri Compromise? Can somebody tell me what the Missouri Compromise is?
Oh, can I speak?
What was that?
All right, I'm gonna answer.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the Missouri Compromise was like it admitted Maine and Missouri into the United States.
Uh-huh.
Maine was a free state and Missouri was a slave state.
Okay,
And
very
that's
good.
the Union and Confederate sides.
Okay, good. So this was a big thing during like Civil War time and things like that, where they're talking about slave states, free states, all of that stuff. So who was Stonewall Jackson? Let's hear from someone else for Stonewall Jackson.
He was a Confederate general during the Civil War, and he's like one of the best known Confederate generals.
Okay, so was he in favor then of slavery or not slavery?
I think Confederate was like South, so he's in favor of slavery, right?
Yes, yes. So he was part of the like pro-slavery states. So why then? So she clearly referenced two issues dealing with slaves, African Americans, fighting against people who disagree with you. So what is the significance of referencing this allusion or this event during this conversation? Let's hear from Maddie. Maddie, what do you think the significance is?
Basically, like at the time, I think pretty much like, well, like lots of people were still very like bitter about losing the Civil War.
Uh-huh.
And so obviously for like most of the citizens probably in Macomb, like it was hard to accept like racial equality and like justice.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously like those were like probably like newer like ideologies. So it was probably like, I guess there's still like a lot of bitterness when it comes to like accepting racial equality.
Yeah, so growing up in the South, right, especially during this time, this stuff isn't super far removed from them, although it was like a little bit ago, it wasn't super far removed. Their grandparents, their great-grandparents were involved with this kind of stuff, so that's very close in terms of like ideologies and changing of ideologies. So people during this time were definitely still feeling that pull between, should we be equal to them? Should they have the same rights as us? Or should there still be this like separation between everyone? And that is part of what's going on here. We're dealing with a case that is of an African-American man versus a white woman, okay? So we are going to have issues coming up in this book and coming up with this trial that are racially charged issues, okay? Along with that, if you're reading in on that page where this all was stated, Atticus then continues on when he says, "Come here, Scout," said Atticus. I crawled into his lap and tucked my head under his chin. He put his arms around me and rocked me gently. "It's different this time," he said. "This time we aren't fighting the Yankees, we're fighting our friends." So when we're talking about Civil War, it was two sides who were in complete disagreement with each other that basically hated each other for their ideologies. Now he's going against the very people that he's supposed to be aligned with. So he's fighting his friends, not his enemies with this. And he's actually supposed to be like supporting what should be his enemy in this trial. So lots of different connections to how you could make this illusion similar to what's actually happening in this trial. Okay. All right. Let's move on to annotation number 3, which is during the a biblical reference. So if you were not able to find this, which it was a little bit difficult if you're not super familiar with biblical references, but it's during the conversation between Atticus and Uncle Jack at the end of the chapter, specifically on page 100, or about the second to the last page, if you're using the small book. Uncle Jack says, "Let this cup pass from you, eh?" So basically saying to him, don't take this trial. Let somebody else take this trial. It's not your responsibility. You don't have to do this. So I want you to look this up if you didn't already. And I want you to find what biblical story this is referencing. And I want you to make note of that in your book. So write like the Bible verse down or what story it's referencing. If you just type in "let this cup pass," biblical reference, you should be able to find it pretty easily. And then respond, why would Lee have chosen to allude to this biblical passage for the situation Atticus is in? Are there similarities? When you have this written down, go ahead and give me the thumbs up emoji on your screen so I can see you're good to go. I'll get people working another minute before I call on people. All right, let's talk about this one. So, what is the story that this comes from? Did anyone find the story that this illusion comes from?
I think it's from the story where, like, wasn't it when, like, Jesus was, like, asking God, like, do I have to sacrifice myself?
Yes, okay, so it comes from, and I need you guys all to write this down in your book, it comes from Matthew 26:39. If you did not find that, Matthew 26:39, which is a few different translations. The one closest to, like, pass this cup or let this cup pass is from the English Standard Version, which says, and going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. Okay, so this is from Jesus being in the Garden of Gethsemane before he is going to be crucified. This is like the story where he's like praying so hard that he's like sweating blood, that story. And he is asking that he doesn't have to be crucified. He's asking God to take this away from him, that he doesn't have to do it, but he's willing to do it if it's what he has to do, and God is calling him to do that. He will do this. Now, why would Lee have referenced this in this situation? How is this a similar, because obviously it's not the same, right? But how is this a logical illusion for her to use here? What is the similarity? I'm going to call on someone at random if no one volunteers. All right. Oh, Gareth, would you like to go? Yes.
So is it kind of like the dude that was talking, Uncle Jack?
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of like a burden in a way that he was like the trial and whatnot, and that it was kind of bothering Atticus in a little bit, and so he said just like let it not like just kind of release the burden to someone else.
Right, like let it not be your burden anymore, right? So very good. So this is a similar situation, and they're both dealing with Jesus in the story from the Bible, and Atticus in this book, both dealing with situations that are very burdensome to them, very emotionally straining. Jesus had a much more extreme situation here than Atticus does. But in a human situation, this is a similar comparison. So it's natural that she would have called on this one. And this is then Atticus saying, I can't, like, I have to do this. Like, I have to take this case. Kind of like Jesus coming to that conclusion that, no, I have to do this. This is what I'm being called to do. Okay. So that's why that illusion was used. It's very, I don't want to say very similar, but it's similar to an extent. Okay. All right, let's get into the next one. So the next one was a line about gender roles, either male or female gender roles in spoken to Scout or by Scout. So I pulled out 2 quotes that you guys might not have gotten, but I need you to go in and highlight or underline these. These are coming from the bigger book. They both come from page 93. I will start searching in the little one for you guys, but if you found it, great. The first one says, I could not possibly hope to be a lady if I wore breeches. When I said I could do nothing in a dress, she said I wasn't supposed to be doing things that required pants. I should be a ray of sunshine in my father's lonely life. So this is roughly like a paragraph on page 93. It goes a little bit onto the next page as well. I think it's 92 and 93 is where it starts. And this is on Alexandra commenting this to Scout. And the second one was Scout talking to Jem, and she goes, boys don't cook. I giggled at the thought of Jem in an apron. So I want you to highlight these, and then I want you to respond to the questions below each one. So for the first one, how does Aunt Alexandra's representation of women or girls represent gender stereotypes during the 1930s? And then the second one is, how does Scout's comment reinforce male stereotypes during the 1930s? So, and then we'll talk about that very last question. So for these quotes, they both come from page 108 and 109 for the little book, 108 and 109.
For the boys don't cook thing, where is that on page 93?
Let's see. I know it's towards the bottom.
I can find it.
What was that?
Oh, I found it.
We found it. Okay. Like at the very
Wait, what
bottom.
do you want us to find again? You cut out for me. When you
You're going to highlight both of these quotes in your textbook or in your novel. If you have the larger book, these page numbers are correct. If you have the smaller book, it's page 107 and 108, or 108 and 109, one of the two. And you're going to highlight them and then answer the questions just below each quote. And you're going to answer
Where
that
are the questions posted?
on the PowerPoint that I'm showing you right now, or on Moodle, if you need to pull it up on Moodle.
Oh, I see. I see.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm not in the screen share.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay. I got it.
Got it?
Well, it's still loading. It's still black screen because my Wi-Fi sucks here.
Okay. So the first question is, how does this represent gender stereotypes? Or really, you're asking, how does this represent gender stereotypes for both? The first one for girls, the second one for boys. All right, let's talk about these. So for the first one, how does this situation with what Aunt Alexandra believes Scout should act like and do and be, how does this represent gender stereotypes during the 1930s when this was written? So let's hear, I'm just gonna call on someone. Let's hear from Sydney. Sydney, how does this represent gender stereotypes at the time?
It kind of shows like how women were supposed to be like the proper one,
Mm-hmm.
while men were supposed to be like the hard labor workers kind of.
Yeah. So during the 1930s, especially, that's like time of like the homemakers, and like women should be acting this way, and they should be very proper and polite and kind and doing everything they're supposed to be doing in the home, right? They're supposed to make everyone happy, not cuss, which we see Scout do quite a bit in this chapter, not put up a fight about things, not get in fights with other people, rather be proper and polite and mature. And so she's holding Scout to those stereotypes. So this is very indicative of what women were expected to be like in the 1930s and really going into like 1940s and 50s, really up until probably like 21st century. This is what women were expected to be like. So the second one, for the boys don't cook, how is this a reinforcement of the male stereotype? Sydney kind of commented on that already, but how is it for the male stereotype? Let's hear from Tiana.
So it's like she says like the thought, like she laughed at the thought that Jem was different, and it just goes to show that like during that time men weren't very like open to be doing work around the house or anything like that. They're always like expected to be sent off doing work for the family and things like that. So that
Yeah, exactly. So they were meant to be outside of the house doing work, whether that be manual labor or whether that be working in some sort of job to bring home money for the family. They weren't meant to be doing the household chores or cooking or anything. And the fact that she's giggling at that image shows that she's reinforcing that idea to Jem. Like, Jem, you're not supposed to do those things. That's for girls. Why would you ever do that? And this is really one of the big times in the book that we see these outright stereotypes coming out. Jem's made a few comments throughout the book saying like, Scout, stop being a little girl, or if you do that, you're just like girls and whatnot. But this is the most time where we've really seen those stereotypes outlined for us. So I'm going to prompt this question to you guys now, and you don't have to write anything for this one, but are these stereotypes still relevant today? Do we see these same things being portrayed for people on a day-to-day basis, or are we seeing something different today? So I'm going to give you a chance to think about that question. If you want to make notes in your book, you can, but you don't have to. And I'm going to call in 2 people to share their thoughts if they think the stereotypes are still relevant today. Maybe think of an example if you can. All right, I'm going to call in 2 people. Let's hear from Andrew. Andrew, what do you think? Do you think these are still relevant today?
I think they're like kind of relevant and kind of not relevant.
Okay.
Like, it kind of depend who you'd ask.
Okay.
I say they're kind of relevant for like men. Like if they don't do like a manly thing, then it's sometimes looked down upon. But it also like who you're asking about it, because some people just have different opinions about it.
Okay, so it depends if you're talking to somebody in a more like progressive state or progressive region or something, right? What they would see. But I think if it's
probably not as relevant as today.
Okay. Okay, good. And let's hear from Jackson. Jackson, what do you think? Jackson? Are you there, Jackson? I see your little square. All right, I will call in someone else since Jackson's not answering. Let's hear from Noah. Noah, what do you think?
One second. So I mean, I would say it's definitely not, that back then, because suffrage was 1920s, I think. So that's like 10 years after. So there's still conflict then, and then now I feel like today it's like there's definitely, it's not that bad, but there's like certain things like maybe like the men do like there's like certain job positions that people see women not doing.
Yeah, I think you definitely still see some of that stereotypes in the jobs, right? Like I know that's a huge movement right now to get more women into jobs like engineering, which are typically seen as like men jobs, right? Or you don't see lots of women going out and doing the construction jobs or things like that. So there's definitely still some sort of stereotype. I think we could all agree, whether or not it's to this extent. I don't think we see like men as not supposed to be cooking anymore. are doing things in the house. We see a lot more like stay-at-home dads these days, or chefs that are guys, or like clothing designers that are men, things that are typically or were typically during this time associated with just women, and vice versa, right? We see a lot more women doing things that men were typically doing. So the gender stereotypes are still around today, but what they look like are a little bit different, right? Okay, very good. So let's get into another one, which is describing Aunt Alexandra. So you could have found a few different quotes for this, ranging from page 88 and 89. 93 is when she's really talked about and described. And what I want you to do is I want you, because all the quotes is from Scout describing her, okay? And Scout does not describe her in a positive light whatsoever. She describes her in a very like rigid, cold, angry manner. So why do you think Scout would have had such negative viewpoints of Aunt Alexandra? So what might have caused that?
I think it's because she like never accepted Scout for who she was and always commented on the way she acts and just never really liked Scout for who she was. So
yeah, and we see her like she's very much so intervening in people's lives and not letting Scout or Jem or like Francis, even their cousin Francis, do as they would like to do. Rather, it's what she thinks they should be doing. And that's very different than how she's been raised by Atticus, right? Like Atticus has kind of let her decide what type of person she wants to be, what type of activities she wants to engage in. And so it's a harsh contrast, right? And then we also see again, or another situation, she has an issue, it seems to be, with women figures. Women authority figures. She had an issue with Miss Caroline, her teacher, telling her what to do. She had an issue with Calpurnia telling her what to do. She has an issue with Aunt Alexandra telling her what to do. She seems to respect the men authority figures more so than the women. And that could come from the fact that she doesn't have a woman authority figure in her life. She doesn't have a mother, right? So she's only used to hearing Atticus tell her what to do. So that could be a piece of that she's not used to that type of authority figure in her life. And then we're going to get into our very last one. So this last one is how Atticus chooses to parent Scout and Jem. So this happens on page 99 to 100 in the big book, the last couple pages of the small book. And a specific point that you could have highlighted is Jack. When a child asks you something, answer him for goodness sake, but don't make a production of it. And then farther down, he says, Scout's got to learn to keep her head and learn soon. So I want you to comment on, next to that section, what is Atticus trying to teach his kids? And then what does this reveal about his values? So you'll actually make those annotations in your text next to that chunk of lines. Or next to the conversation as a whole. I just pulled out some lines from it. So what is Atticus trying to teach his kids, and what does this reveal about his values? And I'll give you guys another like 40 seconds to make notes. All right, so let's hear from Jasmine. Jasmine, what is Atticus trying to teach his kids? What does it seem like he's trying to get across to them?
I said that Atticus is like really open and honest with his kids. So like whatever they ask, like he's more than fine to answer with. Like that, they'll understand.
Okay, good. Yeah, so he wants them to be willing to listen to different perspectives, listen to the stories and things that people are saying, right? By being very honest with them. He feels like that'll breed that honesty within them and that acceptance within them, because he never just like shoots off on them, right? He always tries to listen to both sides before getting angry, which teaches them to do the same thing. So what does this then reveal about his values? Yeah, go ahead.
I said that he's trusting and respecting. Like,
Yeah.
he wants them to know the truth, and he respects them that they'll keep it and stuff, and like take it how they would.
Yeah, very good. He's extremely trusting and very honest. He believes in honesty being like a key value of his, and we see that based off of how he's raising them. Very good job. And then I have one last thing for you guys to kind of make note of. This last thing, you can either make note on your book, on like the last page. I know the big book has space on the before chapter 10 starts. The little book, you probably have a little bit of space where it just says chapter 9, so like the very beginning, or you could write it on a piece of paper if you have a piece of paper available. But we're going to talk about the significance of this chapter, okay? So again, make notes on a sheet of paper, or at the end of chapter 9, beginning of chapter 9 is fine. But there are a few different possibilities for why Lee might have included this chapter in the book, okay? So first thing first, it allows the reader to understand Atticus's parenting style and values that he's trying to pass on to Scout and Jem, which we talked about a little bit. It also allows the reader to begin forming predictions about how this trial may or may not affect the kids, the family as a whole, and the town of Maycomb. We see that in that final conversation between Uncle Jack and Atticus. It also allows for a place to discuss the topic of gender roles and stereotypes, which makes the time period she's writing about more authentic. And that's a really difficult task to do for authors when they're setting a book in a very specific time period. They have to stay true to that time period and make it very clear to the audience that it is set during that time. So having characters like Scout say boys don't cook, or Aunt Alexandra saying you shouldn't be doing things that you can't do in a dress, is very time period authentic, okay? And so that was a very purposeful choice here. And the major thing, though, for this chapter is that it sets the stage for racial issues. So the reader has not really seen any racism or discrimination towards a race up until this point. We have seen Calpurnia. Calpurnia is African American, but she's treated very well. She's treated like family, and she's very well respected. So now we get to see Lee being able to set up the following chapters to discuss this topic by showing the reactions of those in Maycomb and close to or in the Finch family when they hear about Atticus defending an African American. So we see people going up in arms just with the thought of him defending Tom Robinson. And this is really important because now we're starting to see, okay, these people seem so civilized and so nice and so accepting, but now they're kind of changing their tune. How is this going to play out during this trial? Okay, so it sets that up for us really well. So on your guys' quiz next class period, you will see a question like this. I expect you to be able to answer this question in detail and with evidence, okay? So if this question shows up, which I basically just told you it will, you need to be able to explain some of this stuff. And you have annotations for all of them. So that being said, though, I'm going to stop sharing this, and I will post this recording for you guys sometime tonight, so that way